Sarah Mitchell stood behind the counter of the Desert Rose Diner, refilling coffee cups and forcing smiles she didn't feel. The morning sun blazed through the windows of the small roadside restaurant just outside Copper Valley, Arizona. Trucks rumbled past on Highway 10, kicking up dust that settled on everything like a second skin. 3 years ago, she wore a different uniform. 3 years ago, men and women under her command called her Captain Mitchell. 3 years ago, she was leading intelligence operations in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. But that was before the explosion. Before the shrapnel tore through her left leg. Before the medical discharge that ended her career at 32 years old. Now she poured coffee in a town where most people knew her as that veteran girl who limps, or worse. Didn't know her at all. "Hey, sweetheart, this coffee tastes like dirt," a trucker called out, snapping his fingers at her. His buddies laughed. Sarah walked over, her left leg aching with each step, though she never let it show on her face. "I'll get you a fresh pot, sir." "Maybe get someone who knows what they're doing to make it," he said, smirking. His friends erupted in laughter. She bit her tongue. 3 years ago, she would have led troops into combat. Now she swallowed insults from strangers who would never understand what she'd sacrificed. The owner, Pete, watched from the kitchen window. He was a good man, a Vietnam vet himself, but he needed workers and couldn't afford to lose customers. He gave her an apologetic look. She nodded. She understood. After her shift ended at 2 in the afternoon, Sarah drove her old Jeep through town. Copper Valley was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, where the biggest news was usually about the high school football team, or whose marriage was falling apart. Population just under 3,000, 1 main street, 2 gas stations, a sheriff's department with exactly 4 deputies. She pulled into the parking lot of her small rental house on the edge of town. The rent was cheap because the place bordered the empty desert on one side and the highway on the other. But Sarah liked it. The isolation reminded her that she didn't quite fit anywhere anymore. That evening, as the sun painted the sky orange and purple, Sarah sat on her back porch doing what she did most nights, watching. Old habits from her military days died hard. She noticed patterns, movement, things that didn't belong. And tonight, something didn't belong. Through her binoculars, she watched the highway. Traffic was light at this hour. A few cars, a camper. Then she saw them, 3 black SUVs moving in formation, perfectly spaced, driving exactly at the speed limit, not 1 mile faster or slower. That alone caught her attention. Nobody drove that precisely unless they were trying not to be noticed. Her pulse quickened. Old instincts kicked in. She adjusted the binoculars and focused on the vehicles as they passed under a streetlight. The windows were tinted dark, too dark to be legal. The license plates were covered in just enough dust to make the numbers hard to read, but not so much that it looked deliberate. Professional, organized, careful. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. She'd seen convoys like this before, overseas, smugglers, traffickers, criminals who knew how to move without drawing attention. She checked her watch, 7:15 p.m. For the next 3 hours, she watched the highway. At exactly 10:15, the same 3 SUVs came back, heading in the opposite direction. Same formation, same spacing, same speed. Her heart hammered in her chest. She went inside and opened her laptop. Years of intelligence training had taught her to document everything. She created a file and began typing. Time, vehicle descriptions, direction of travel, patterns. Over the next 4 days, Sarah watched. Every evening at 7:15, the 3 SUVs headed west. Every night at 10:15, they returned east. Like clockwork. On the 5th day, she drove into town and walked into the Copper Valley Sheriff's Department. Deputy Frank Russo sat at the front desk, feet up, scrolling through his phone. "Help you?" he asked without looking up. "I need to report suspicious activity," Sarah said. That got his attention. He looked at her and recognition crossed his face. "Oh, you're the veteran. The one who works at Pete's Diner, right?" "Yes, Sarah Mitchell." "I was Army intelligence, He put his phone down.
What's this about?
Sarah placed her notes on the counter. "For the past 5 days, I've observed 3 SUVs traveling Highway 10 in a tactical formation. Same vehicles, same time, same pattern. This is consistent with organized criminal activity." "Possibly smuggling," Frank stared at her. Then he laughed. "Ma'am, this is a highway. People drive on it." "Not like this," Sarah insisted. The spacing, the timing, the precision, this is trained behavior. I've seen it before in the army, right? Frank leaned back in his chair. Look, I appreciate your service and all, but this ain't Afghanistan. This is Arizona. People drive to Vegas, to California. They come back. That's what highways are for. Did you look at my notes? The pattern is, ma'am, I don't mean to be rude, but we deal with real problems here. Drunk drivers. Domestic disputes. We don't have time to chase down every car that drives by your house because you're bored. Heat flushed Sarah's cheeks. I'm not bored. You're trained to serve coffee now, Frank interrupted, his tone harder. Maybe stick to that, yeah? Another deputy, younger, snickered from across the room. Sarah felt the familiar sting of humiliation. The same feeling she'd battled since coming home. The invisible wall between who she was and who people saw. She gathered her notes. If you're right, then I'll personally apologize, Frank said. But you're not. Go home, Sarah, get some rest. Maybe talk to someone about stress. I hear the VA has programs. The implication was clear. He thought she was broken, paranoid, a damaged soldier seeing threats that weren't there. Sarah walked out of that sheriff's office with her jaw clenched and her hands shaking, not from fear, from rage. She'd spent 10 years defending people who now treated her like she was invisible, like her experience meant nothing. Like her instincts were just the delusions of a washed-up soldier who couldn't let go of the past. But Sarah Mitchell knew what she saw. And she knew what it meant. If the sheriff wouldn't listen, she'd have to handle this herself. No badge. No backup, no choice. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind running through scenarios. She could be wrong. Maybe Frank was right. Maybe she was seeing patterns where none existed. Ghosts of her old life haunting her new one. But she'd trusted her instincts for 10 years in the military, and they'd kept her and her team alive. Those instincts were screaming now. At 6 a.m., she got up and made coffee, strong and black, the way she'd learned to drink it during endless night shifts on base. She opened her laptop and started digging. Sarah might not have a badge anymore, but she still had skills. She still had access to public records, traffic cameras, and satellite imagery available to anyone who knew where to look. Most people didn't, but intelligence officers did. She pulled up traffic camera footage from public sources along Highway 10. It took hours of searching, but she found them. 3 black SUVs, same formation, same timing. Going back 2 weeks, her pulse quickened. She zoomed in on the clearest image. The lead vehicle's license plate was just barely visible. She ran it through a public records database, registered to a shell company in Delaware. Red flag number 1. The shell company's listed address was a vacant lot. Red flag number 2, no business license, no tax records, no digital footprint beyond the bare minimum to appear legitimate. Red flag number 3. Sarah sat back, her coffee growing cold. This wasn't just suspicious. This was professional criminal operation, the kind with resources and planning. She pulled up maps of the area. Highway 10 ran east to west. To the west, about 40 miles out, was an abandoned industrial complex. Old mining operation that shut down in the 90s. To the east, the highway eventually connected to routes heading toward the Mexican border. Her mind assembled the puzzle pieces. Pickup location west, dropper distribution point east, using the empty desert highway during low traffic hours to minimize exposure. But what were they moving? Drugs, weapons, people she needed to know. Because if this was what she thought it was, people were in danger, and nobody else was paying attention. That evening, Sarah prepared like she was planning a mission. She hadn't done this in 3 years, but the training came back like muscle memory. Dark clothing, binoculars, camera with a long-range lens, water, protein bars, first aid kit. And though she had no weapon, her service pistol was turned in when she was discharged. She packed a tactical knife and pepper spray. She felt alive for the first time since leaving the Army. At 6 p.m., she drove west on Highway 10, toward the abandoned mining complex. She found a dirt access road about a mile from the site and hid her Jeep behind a cluster of rocks and desert brush. Then she moved on foot. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of amber and red. Her left leg ached with each step, the old injury protesting the rough terrain. She ignored it. Pain was just information. It told you that you were still alive. She reached a ridge overlooking the mining complex just as darkness fell. Through her binoculars, she scanned the area. The place looked abandoned. Rusted equipment, collapsed buildings, chain-link fence with a faded no trespassing sign. But then she saw it. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt, recently disturbed ground near one of the larger warehouse structures, and a faint light coming from inside a building that should have been empty. Sarah's breathing slowed. She was trained for this. Observation, intelligence gathering, patience. At 7:10 p.m., she heard engines. The 3 SUVs rolled into the complex, headlights off, navigating by the moonlight. They parked in a triangle formation near the warehouse. Professional, tactical. Doors opened. 6 men emerged, all armed. She could see the outlines of rifles even from a distance. Sarah's heart pounded. She was right. This was big. She raised her camera and started taking photos. Long-range lens. High resolution. Evidence. The men opened the warehouse and began loading wooden crates into the SUVs. Large crates. Heavy based on how the men moved them. Not drugs. Drugs didn't require that much space or weight. Weapons, she thought. Had to be. She photographed everything. Faces, license plates. The crates. The operation. 40 minutes later, the SUVs were loaded. The men secured the warehouse and departed, heading east on Highway 10 back toward town. Sarah waited 30 minutes after they left, then carefully made her way down to the complex. She knew this was dangerous. She knew she should leave and take what she had to the authorities, but Frank's dismissive face flashed in her mind. He wouldn't believe photos. He'd say they proved nothing, say she was harassing innocent people. She needed more. Sarah approached the warehouse carefully. The door was locked with a heavy chain and padlock. But the building was old. She found a broken window on the side and carefully climbed through, her legs screaming in protest. Inside, she used her phone's flashlight. The warehouse was mostly empty except for more crates stacked along the far wall. She approached them carefully, listening for any sound that might indicate she wasn't alone. She found a crate with a loose board and pried it open slightly. Her blood ran cold. Military-grade weapons. AR-15s, ammunition, explosives. This wasn't small time. This was major arms trafficking. She took photos of everything, her hands shaking now, not from fear but from adrenaline. Then she heard it. A vehicle approaching. Sarah's training kicked in instantly. She pocketed her phone, moved to the shadows, and found a hiding spot behind a stack of old equipment. A truck pulled up outside. Not one of the SUVs. Different vehicle. She heard voices. 2 men. Supposed to be here an hour ago, one said. Traffic, relax, we'll make the delivery. Boss doesn't like delays. Boss doesn't like a lot of things. We're fine. They were coming toward the warehouse. Sarah's mind raced. She was trapped. One exit and they were walking toward it. If they found her armed as they were, she was dead. She looked around desperately. Old mining equipment. Rusted shelving. A door marked office. She moved silently, every instinct from her training engaged. She reached the office door just as she heard the chain on the main entrance being unlocked. The office was dark and smelled like mold. She pressed herself against the wall behind the door, barely breathing. The men entered the warehouse. Their flashlight beams swept the space. Grabbed the shipment from the back. 4 crates. Got it. Sarah could hear them moving. Footsteps scraping, grunting as they lifted heavy loads. Then one of them stopped. Hey, you see that? Sarah's heart stopped. What? That crate? It's been opened. Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. You sure? Positive. Wasn't like this yesterday. Could have been Rodriguez checking inventory. Rodriguez is in Tucson. Someone's been here. More silence. Then footsteps. Coming toward the office, Sarah's hand went to her knife. She wouldn't go down without a fight. The door started to open, then a phone rang. One of the men answered. Yeah? Now? All right, we're coming. The footsteps retreated. Let's go. Boss wants us back now. We'll deal with this later. What about the now? Sarah waited, frozen, as they loaded their truck and left. She waited another 20 minutes, listening to the silence, making sure they were truly gone. Then she moved. She climbed back through the window and ran, as fast as her injured leg would allow, back to her Jeep. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every sound like footsteps. She reached her vehicle, started it, and drove back toward town, her hands gripping the wheel so tight her knuckles were white. She had evidence now. Undeniable. Clear. Tomorrow she'd go back to the sheriff. He'd have to listen now. But as she pulled into her driveway at midnight, she saw something that made her blood turn to ice. Her front door was open. She never left it open. Someone had been in her house. Sarah sat in her Jeep, engine off, staring at her open front door. The porch light she'd left on cast long shadows across the threshold. Every instinct told her to drive away. Call the police. Wait for backup, but she had no backup, and the police thought she was paranoid. She reached under her seat and pulled out her tactical knife and pepper spray. Then she stepped out of the vehicle, moving silently toward her house. The desert night was cool and quiet. Too quiet. She approached from the side, staying out of the light. Through her living room window, she could see that furniture had been moved. Drawers opened. Someone had searched her home. Professional. Looking for something specific. Her laptop. Her notes. Her photographs. Sarah's jaw tightened. They knew someone was watching them. They were covering their tracks. She entered through the back door, which was also unlocked. Inside, the damage was clear. Every room had been searched. Not ransacked like a robbery. This was systematic. Methodical. Her laptop was gone from the kitchen, table where she'd left it. But Sarah Mitchell hadn't survived. 10 years in Army intelligence by being careless. She'd backed up everything to a secure cloud server. Old habit. The kind that saved lives, or in this case, evidence. She moved through her house room by room, clearing it like she'd been trained. No one was here now. They'd done what they came for and left, but the message was clear. We know who you are. We know where you live. Stop. Most people would have stopped. Would have been terrified. Would have convinced themselves it was too dangerous, too big, too much for one person. Sarah Mitchell wasn't most people. She grabbed her go bag, another old habit, always packed and ready, and left the house. She wouldn't be coming back tonight. Maybe not for a while. She drove to the one place in Copper Valley where she could think clearly. The 24-hour truck stop off Highway 10. She parked under the bright lights where there were witnesses and cameras, bought coffee she didn't want, and sat in a corner booth with her phone. She downloaded all her files from the cloud. Every photo, every note, every piece of evidence. Then she opened her contacts and found a name she hadn't called in 2 years. Major Diane Foster, her former commanding officer. The woman who'd written her medical discharge papers with tears in her eyes, calling it a waste of one of the best intelligence officers she'd ever known. Sarah sent an encrypted message with all the evidence attached. Need help. Arms trafficking operation in Arizona. Local law enforcement won't listen. Suspects know I'm investigating. What are my options? She hit send and waited. 3 minutes later, her phone buzzed. Stay safe. Forwarding to ATF contact in Phoenix. Agent Maria Chen. She'll reach out within the hour. Do not engage alone. That's an order, Captain. Even retired, Diane still called her Captain. It made Sarah's throat tight. 45 minutes later, a number she didn't recognize called. Sarah Mitchell, a woman's voice, professional, alert, speaking. This is Special Agent Maria Chen, ATF. Major Foster sent me your intel. I'm reviewing it now. Sarah heard keyboard typing in the background. This is solid work, Chen continued. Very solid. We've been tracking rumors of weapons moving through that corridor for 6 months but had no proof. You found their hub in less than a week. So you'll investigate? We'll do more than investigate. Based on this evidence, I can get a warrant. We'll raid the location, seize the weapons, shut down the operation. Relief flooded through Sarah. Finally, someone listening. Someone acting. How soon? Sarah asked. We need to move fast. If they know they're compromised, they'll disappear. I can have a team assembled by tomorrow night. We'll hit them during their next transport. 7:15 p.m., Sarah said. That's when they move. You're certain? 5 days of observation. They're consistent. Good. Listen, Sarah, you did excellent work here. Dangerous, but excellent. Now you need to step back and let us handle it. Sarah knew Chen was right. She'd done her part. Gathered intelligence. Passed it to the proper authorities. This was where her role ended. But something nagged at her. Agent Chen, they searched my house tonight. Stole my laptop. They know someone's onto them. Silence on the other end. Then, are you safe right now? I'm in a public place. Stay public. Stay visible. Do you have somewhere you can go for a few days? I'll figure it out. Good, I'm going to text you a number. It's a direct line to me. Anything happens, anything at all, you call. Understand? Understood. They hung up. Sarah sat back, her coffee cold, her body exhausted, but her mind still racing. She'd done it. Against all odds, despite being mocked and dismissed, she'd uncovered a major criminal operation and gotten federal authorities involved. But she didn't feel victorious. She felt uneasy. She drove to a cheap motel on the other side of town and paid cash for a room. She didn't sleep. She watched the parking lot through the window and reviewed her evidence over and over. The next day dragged. She called in sick to work, first time ever. Pete sounded concerned, but she promised she was fine. Just needed a day. She stayed in the motel room waiting for 7:15 p.m. At 6:30, Agent Chen called. We're in position. Team is ready. If everything goes as planned, we'll have them in custody by 8 p.m. I wanted to call and say thank you. You may have saved lives with this intelligence. Just doing what's right, Sarah said, more than most would do. Stay safe, Sarah. I'll call you when it's done. Sarah sat on the edge of the motel bed, watching the clock. 7 p.m., 7:15. Her phone was silent. 7:30. Still nothing. 8 p.m. The silence felt wrong. At 8:20, her phone finally rang. Agent Chen. Sarah, we have a problem. Her stomach dropped. What happened? They didn't show. The warehouse is empty. Completely cleared out. Every weapon, every crate, every piece of evidence gone. It's like they knew we were coming. Sarah's mind raced. That's impossible. I didn't tell anyone but you. And I only told my team. People I trust, then how? I don't know. But someone tipped them off. We missed them. Sarah stood up, pacing the small motel room. What now? Now we try to track where they went. But I'll be honest, Sarah. These people are ghosts. They had a whole operation disappear in less than 24 hours. That takes resources, connections, maybe even inside information. Inside information. Sarah's blood ran cold. Agent Chen, what if the leak isn't in your department? What do you mean? What if it's in local law enforcement? Silence. Then Chen's voice harder now. Explain. I tried to report this to the Copper Valley Sheriff's Department. Deputy named Frank Russo. He dismissed me. Completely. Didn't even look at the evidence. What if he wasn't just lazy? What if he was protecting them? That's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation. They searched my house the same night I went to the sheriff. That's not coincidence. Sarah could hear Chen breathing, thinking. All right, don't trust local law enforcement. Don't contact them. Let me dig into this from my end. In the meantime, you need to disappear. If what you're saying is true and local deputies are involved, you're in real danger. I can handle myself. Sarah, I don't doubt your training or your courage, but these people have already shown they're willing to break into your home. What's next? You need to... Sarah's attention snapped to her motel window. A black SUV had just pulled into the parking lot, same model as the Convoy. They found me, Sarah whispered. What? They're here. At the motel. Get out, now, I'm sending... No time. Sarah hung up. She grabbed her go-bag and moved to the bathroom, the only room without a window. She climbed onto the toilet and pushed open the small ventilation window. Barely big enough, but she'd make it work. She heard car doors slamming outside. Heavy footsteps. She squeezed through the window, her injured leg screaming, and dropped into the alley behind the motel just as she heard her room door being kicked open. She ran into the desert darkness. No plan except survival. Sarah ran until her lungs burned and her injured leg felt like it might give out completely. She ran until the lights of the motel were distant specks behind her, until she was surrounded by nothing but darkness and desert and the sound of her own ragged breathing. Then she stopped, crouched behind a large rock formation and listened. No pursuit. Not yet. They'd search the motel first, then expand outward. She had maybe 10 minutes. She pulled out her phone. No signal. Out here in the deep desert, she was completely alone. No badge, no backup. And now no way to call for help. But Sarah's mind was already working. Fear was just another form of information. It told you the stakes. What she did with that information was what mattered. She thought about the convoy, about the timing, about how they'd known to clear out before the ATF raid, about how they'd found her at the motel. Someone was feeding them information. Someone with access to law enforcement communications. Deputy Frank Russo's face appeared in her mind. The way he'd dismissed her without even looking at the evidence. The way he'd mocked her. What if it wasn't incompetence? What if it was protection? The pieces fell into place. A small town, limited law enforcement, easy to corrupt, perfect for a smuggling operation. A few $1,000s a month to look the other way, and criminals had a safe corridor for moving weapons. Sarah checked her watch. 9:30 p.m. The convoy ran every night. They'd cleared out the warehouse, but they'd need to move their operation, regroup, change locations, but they'd still need to move product. And they'd still use Highway 10 because it was the route they knew, the route they controlled. Sarah made a decision that was either brilliant or suicidal. Probably both. She was going to stop that convoy, tonight. Alone. She had no weapons except her knife and pepper spray. She had no authority. She had no backup, but she had training. And she had something more important. She had nothing left to lose. Sarah moved through the desert parallel to Highway 10, staying out of sight. Her leg throbbed with every step, but she pushed through. Pain was temporary. Justice was worth it. She reached a section of the highway she'd scouted during her surveillance. A narrow pass between two rocky ridges, only one lane in each direction. No way around if the road was blocked. Perfect. She gathered rocks and debris from the desert and began piling them across the eastbound lane. Not enough to look like a roadblock that would make them suspicious. Just enough to look like a rock slide, natural, common in this area. Then she positioned herself on the ridge above with a clear view of both directions, and she waited. At 10:45 p.m., she saw headlights approaching from the west. 3 vehicles. Perfect spacing, the convoy. Sarah's heart hammered. This was it. The lead SUV slowed as it approached the rock slide. The driver would have to stop, assess, possibly clear the road or find a way around. That moment of hesitation was all she needed. The SUV stopped. The driver got out, speaking into a radio. Sarah moved. She'd done this kind of operation before. Disabled enemy vehicles, created diversions. The training was old, but it was there, buried in her muscle memory. She climbed down from the ridge in the darkness, silent as a shadow. The driver was focused on the rocks, his back to her. She approached the SUV from behind, staying low. The other 2 vehicles had stopped behind the first, engines running. She pulled out her knife and punctured the rear tires of the lead vehicle, quick, efficient, silent. Then, she moved to the second SUV before anyone noticed. But the third vehicle's passenger was more alert. He stepped out and saw her in the moonlight. "Hey!" Sarah ran. Shouts erupted behind her. Doors slamming. Engines revving. She sprinted into the desert using the darkness and her knowledge of the terrain. Behind her she heard vehicles trying to pursue, but the rocky ground stopped them. Footsteps followed her. Men with flashlights. Armed men. But Sarah had spent years training in worse conditions. She doubled back using an old tactical maneuver. Let them chase the noise while she circled around. She made it back to the highway and approached the stopped convoy from the opposite direction. 2 of the 3 vehicles were disabled. The third was trying to navigate around the rock slide. Sarah pulled out her phone. Still no signal. But she'd prepared for that. From her go bag, she pulled out an old emergency flare, standard equipment she'd never removed. She lit it and placed it in the middle of the highway. Bright red light exploded into the night, the universal signal for emergency. For help, any passing vehicle would stop, and more importantly, it would draw attention. The men chasing her saw the flare and turned back, realizing what she'd done. Put it out. Put it out. But it was too late. Sarah heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Sirens. Not Copper Valley Sheriff. These were coming from the west. Highway patrol. Someone had seen the flare and called it in. The convoy was trapped. Disabled vehicles. Blockage ahead. Witnesses coming. The armed men looked at each other, then ran into the desert on foot, abandoning the SUVs. Sarah stayed hidden in the rocks as 2 highway patrol vehicles arrived, followed minutes later by more units. She watched as officers approached the abandoned SUVs carefully, weapons drawn. Watched as they called for backup. Watched as they opened the vehicles and found the crates of weapons inside. Then she pulled out her phone. She had 1 bar of signal. Enough, she called Agent Chen. "Sarah, where are you? Are you okay? Highway 10, mile marker 73. You need to get here now." I've got your convoy. Silence. Then say that again. The convoy. 3 SUVs. Loaded with weapons. Highway patrol has them secured. But the suspects fled on foot into the desert. You have maybe a 30-minute window to set up a perimeter and catch them. How did you... Later. Just get here. Sarah hung up and slumped against the rock, her entire body shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. She'd done it. 40 minutes later, the scene was swarming with federal agents, ATF, FBI, Highway Patrol, helicopters overhead with searchlights sweeping the desert. Agent Chen found Sarah sitting on the tailgate of a patrol vehicle, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, being examined by a paramedic. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most reckless, Chen said. Can I be both? Sarah replied, managing a weak smile. Chen shook her head but smiled back. We've apprehended 4 suspects. 2 more are still out there, but we'll get them. And Sarah, she paused. We arrested Deputy Frank Russo 20 minutes ago. Sarah looked up sharply. We dug into his finances like you suggested. He's been receiving payments from a shell corporation for 8 months. Same corporation that owned the convoy vehicles. He was feeding them information. When you came to him with your report, he warned them immediately. Rage and vindication warred in Sarah's chest. He'll spend the next 20 years in federal prison, Chen continued, along with everyone else involved. And that's thanks to you. Over the next few days, the story came out. The weapons trafficking ring had been operating for over a year, moving military-grade firearms to criminal organizations across the Southwest. Millions of dollars, countless crimes enabled, and it had taken one former Army captain, working alone with no authority and no backup, to bring it all down. The media caught wind of the story. Disabled veteran stops major arms trafficking ring, the headlines read. News vans descended on Copper Valley. But Sarah didn't give interviews. She didn't want attention. She just wanted her life back. 2 weeks after the arrests, Sarah walked into the Desert Rose Diner for her shift. Pete met her at the door. You don't work here anymore, he said. Her heart sank. Pete, you work for me, a voice said behind her. She turned. Agent Maria Chen stood there in a professional suit holding a folder. The ATF could use someone with your skills. Intelligence analysis. Field work. Making the kind of difference you made here. Chen opened the folder. This is a formal job offer. Full benefits, salary, proper backup. Sarah stared at the papers, her hands trembling. You've been doing this job without a badge, Chen continued. How about we make it official? Sarah looked at the badge attached to the offer letter. Special agent. For 3 years she'd felt lost, discarded. Like her best years were behind her. But she'd been wrong. They were just beginning. When do I start? Sarah asked. Chen smiled. How about now? 3 months later, Sarah stood in a federal courtroom as the verdicts were read. Guilty. All counts. Every member of the trafficking ring, including Deputy Frank Russo. As they were led away in handcuffs, Russo looked at her. The mockery was gone from his eyes, replaced by something else, respect and fear. Sarah didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply turned and walked out of the courtroom. She had new cases to work, new criminals to catch, new battles to fight. She'd proven what she'd always known, that her value wasn't defined by the uniform she wore or the title on her badge. It was defined by her courage, her skill, her refusal to give up when everyone else had counted her out. She'd had no badge and no backup, but she'd had something more powerful. She'd had herself, and that was enough.